everybody, and welcome to another episode of Video Game Soundtrack Review. My name is Terence.
And I'm Big Mike.
Today we're going to be talking about one of Big Mike's favorite Super Nintendo games, Super Castlevania IV. Mike, let's talk about the soundtrack that we just listened to on vinyl.
See, the thing with the soundtrack is, like, not only is it one of my favorite games of all time, it's actually one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, too. Which is just, this is perfect marriage. And this... I use the term haunting, I think, when we were first listening to this, and it's the kind of soundtrack that just absolutely sticks with you. And when we were listening to it, Terrence says, okay, Mike, what stage is this from? And I just knew every stage, because every piece of music fits every stage perfectly. And the one that still blows me away to this day, not only Simon Belmont's theme, which we've been, as setting up the cameras here, we've been humming to ourselves as we've been setting up, is the stage when you're in the cave with the Mudman, and what I believe is to be harp samples. With just a simple little dun 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 dun, and then with the flute sound in the background, it almost like this kind of music that gives you a bit of, like, chills, like when you kind of feel that hair standing up in the back of your neck.
Well, it's not surprising as we have a look at the back to reveal who did the original video game soundtrack, which of course was the Konami Kukaiha Club. I know I'm butchering that, but I'm trying to be very gentle with it. So, of course, and that's the same musical group that was responsible for the soundtrack for another one of our favorite games of all time, and probably one of our favorite soundtracks of all time, Snatcher, which we've already watched. We've done a video, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's pretty good, I think. So, one thing that I was completely taken aback from, because I know you've played this game more than I have, so you're more familiar with the music, but what moved me was how much of the music I knew, and how much of I knew exclusively from Castlevania IV. So when we were listening to it on vinyl, it was very cool because I was feeling that connection from the video game, but I was able to detach myself and feel the mood that clearly they were trying to accomplish with the organs and the samples of, like, the harps, and there was even kind of like a... If this was on Genesis, it would be like a Sega Genesis. It would be like a shrill timpani of trumpet, but with the samples through the Super Nintendo with the Sony chip, it just kind of like lifted me up. It sparked me up. It's like, okay, something needs to be done now. And with all those aspects to the soundtrack, but especially the brooding and the foreboding with the organ work and the tempo, I felt unease at times listening to it in the best possible way.
And it's odd too, because like I said before, like how every stage sounds a bit different, and one track can be like this, like I said, this brooding, then this little bit of synth going on in the background, simulating like some string instruments. And then suddenly the next stage is like this hammering piano, just pounding away. And it's kind of, you're right, it puts you at unease, because in the game, obviously you're traveling through different areas leading up to the castle. Then when you're in the castle, and every area is quite a bit different. It's a swamp, there's like a dungeon, there's a gallery, and I think every soundtrack, like obviously the composers knew, this type of music is going to fit this scenario just perfectly.
Let's talk about the vinyl for a second. Grab one of those and bring it over. So this was released on two records. It's 180 gram vinyl, and it's this really, really cool opaque, like silver with red blood splatter is the best way I can describe it. I'm always surprised and happily surprised when color vinyl sounds as good as it does, right? And this is just another example. Like, Mike, you're so familiar with the soundtrack from playing the game. What was it like hearing it on vinyl on a hi-fi system for the first time?
Much different, actually, because when I was playing it originally on the Super Nintendo, like back when it first came out, I had my little setup with my two little computer speakers, set up in my little 14-inch CRT TV, and then even playing it recently in my home theater with my surround sound. But it's still, listening it on LP, it's still a much different experience. It sounds like a cliche, but I'm gonna say it's much more of a fuller experience. Like, especially like that brooding bit, or even with the scene where at the beginning with the gravestone that gets hit by the lightning, like just that. Yeah, it just sounds so much better on vinyl, which is an odd thing to say, because I think we discussed in the last video. It's analog sound, but based on an original digital source, which shouldn't be making any sense, but it absolutely does.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with the concept of music that was developed with the exclusive intention to accompany, to accompany a video game. So something that is digital in its pure sense. Yet when you listen to the soundtrack on vinyl, Castlevania IV, Super Castlevania IV, is a great example of that. It felt like what the Konami Club was trying to do. They succeeded in spades. They were able to create a soundtrack, create pieces of music that were able to fit the mood of what they were going for. It was able to fit the scenery and and the tempo and the pace of what was going on at the game at a certain time. And I find anytime someone can compose music that has that strong of a connection to its intended accompaniment, it's great. It's a home run as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And what's crazy about it to even think it's one of the first Super Nintendo soundtracks, because the game came out very early in Super Nintendo's life, within the first few months of its launch.
Mm-hmm.
And these developers were using a new technology at the time, which was Super Nintendo sound chip was based on using samples all mixed together, which was different than, like, say, how they had to do it on the NES or even the Genesis, for that matter. So the fact that they've, as you said, knocked it out of the bloody park on their first try, it is really amazing. To say that this game, which for us at least came out in '91, I still say is probably like the best Castlevania soundtrack ever recorded.
It's a great soundtrack. I don't know what else to say. Obviously, there are standout tracks on it, and my favorite, of course, is hearing, the Simon Belmont theme, which is essentially the theme of Castlevania. Oh, get ready for copyright strike. And it encapsulates what it set out to do so well. I think that's why I'm impressed with this, because I've only played and cleared the game once, and we will talk about the game on Chargeback Forward.
Yes.
Link with that will be below. But just from the music standpoint, this is one of those times where the soundtrack stands so well on its own that it's, for me, that is the success of it, because a soundtrack would be great if it accompanies something, but if you listen to a soundtrack independent and then you just you can't even visualize what happens, it's a miss. And listening to you, like what you told me about it, and just how you're able, like what you were saying, I would say what's going on, and you would be able to, and it's not because of the game, it's because of the connection with the music that you had with it and the impact that it had. So personally, I don't know what else to say. It's, if you have any interest in the Castlevania series, or for those that are watching our channel more focused from a vinyl standpoint, this is a really great example of taking a soundtrack that has no business being on vinyl.
It's one of those things too, like you said, with the people who may not be into video games and just into vinyl, this is the kind of video game soundtrack where you could maybe bring over a friend who knows nothing about video games, nothing about Castlevania, and just say, hey, listen to this, and just get the reaction from it, because it, like I said, it stands on its own. You don't need any relationship with the actual video game, I think, to enjoy this, which is, again, a great sign of a soundtrack.
Absolutely. One thing I will say about it, though, as we were starting to listen to it, and we were thinking, wow, this is very moody. And even you were a little, you're like, wait a minute, this kind of sounds like the end of the last game, and there's something interesting about it. And then, of course, it took us to the Belmont theme, where we realized that we were playing it on 33, when in reality it was supposed to be played on 45. So, but that's even playing it at the wrong speed until we were confronted with music that we were very familiar with.
Yeah.
It was still good. So this is a soundtrack that if you can get your hands on it, it's definitely worthwhile. I have a feeling that before I relinquish this LP back to you, it may be listened to one or twice more before you get it, and that's just the strength of it. I was very happy listening to it. So, Mike?
Closing thoughts. Still, to this day, the game came out in '91, so here we are, decades later. I still consider it to be one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, arguably one of the best Super Nintendo soundtracks of all time. I don't think there's anything else to say other than just, you gotta listen to it. I think, and listen to it right. With the soundtrack this moody and fulfilling, I say listen to it like maybe put down lights down low, maybe be by yourself or with a good friend, and just kind of zone out to it.
Maybe light a few candles.
Oh, a few candles there, yep.
Maybe have a crucifix somewhere. Maybe hide some like meat behind the wall. But I guess we'll get into that when we talk on Chargeback Forward about the video game that is Super Castlevania IV. Thanks everyone for watching. It was a pleasure listening to this soundtrack and a pleasure talking about it. And we're looking forward to talking about the video game, which is literally what we're going to do now for Chargeback Forward.
Absolutely.